Well, Ricky, we haven't seen you for a while, and then all of a sudden, the NASCAR Hall of Fame. You weren't there that day.
I wasn't there, but I got a text or a phone call. I can't remember. It's kind of vague, but
Yeah.
I was there pretty quickly.
Now, your name had obviously been on the ballot. So what was your reaction? Who called? Was it Winston? I guess.
No, I got a text from. I'm gonna let him stay anonymous right now because I don't know if he went outside the envelope to contact me or not. Don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I got a text literally at I think it was at 4:20.
Yeah.
And the announcement's going to be made at 5:00. And basically, the text, it didn't say that I was in the Hall of Fame. It said, it's in your best interest, I think, if you come on down to the Hall of Fame. And it wasn't real hard to figure that one out. I knew it was vote day.
Yeah.
So I said, man, this is wild. I can't believe this. But I still left the house not 100% sure if I was in the Hall of Fame or not.
So when they read your name, what was that moment like?
Yeah, it was kind of like almost disbelief because I think what made it kind of, I wouldn't say difficult. The years were getting more difficult because I was on the ballot for, I think this was the 8th year. So I was going through this process, which is a good thing to have to worry about if you're going to make it or not or get that call. And the days would come and go, and it'd be a huge letdown. So the last couple of years, I didn't get too excited about it. I knew when vote day was, and I knew I needed to be in the Charlotte area on vote day just in case, because we spent some time in Florida too. So we want to make sure we're in this area at that time. And so when I got the message to get down there, it was like kind of disbelief. Couldn't hardly really believe it finally maybe come true, but I wasn't sure until I got there.
You and I talked back in, 2009, 10, somewhere in there. And at that point, I mentioned the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and you didn't necessarily blow it off, but you said, there's a lot of people that need to go in, and then maybe we can consider my case and all that kind of thing. What did it mean to you personally to finally get that word, hear your name announced? Yeah. But what did it mean to you personally that you finally got that acknowledgement?
I think the biggest thing is it's kind of like, when you're always shooting to win a race or win championships. And, probably my biggest race win was Indianapolis. And, that was really big, and it really still stands out in my mind. But for some reason, I never gave up on a championship. I always went after it. It just never, I think we came close one year, finished second. Yeah. But I don't think that meant as much to me. If I'd have won a championship, I think the Hall of Fame to me, I think what it says is that the people that we race with, our peers, the guys we competed against day to day, a lot of those guys have the say-so in the vote. So I think it's to know that you are recognized to be, one of the elite status guys to race during that era. And it probably personally meant more to me than any championship could have ever meant.
I always thought that one of the things that necessarily, I don't want to say necessarily hurt your case, but there are, 3 or 4 guys who have really similar careers. You and Harry Gant and Neil Bonnet, Jeff Bodine, I guess. Mm-hmm. I think you all have a similar number of wins. And it would be hard to make a case. What do you think finally put you over the top? I have an opinion, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with the fans, too. The fans were real instrumental. I know there's a write-in portion of the ballot, but I think I understand, I don't do a whole lot of online stuff, but I understand that the fans really went to bat, and we're starting to get pretty angry that, if you lay records out and you look at the win column and you look at top 5s, top 10s, and things of that nature, we were starting to actually have credentials that maybe could have got us in a year or two earlier, 2 or 3 years maybe, and and we didn't get there. And I think coming close a couple of years ago on the vote, missed it by maybe 1 vote of getting in. I think the fans really, got behind and helped push this thing through, I think. But I think, as time goes on and, articles get written, and I think that's probably set my career apart differently was the timing when I came into the sport. I came in the mid-'70s, and I was just turned 18, just graduated from high school. And the first race car that I actually sat in was a Cup car at Rockingham, North Carolina. Prior to that, go-karts, dirt bikes, kind of more like regional neighborhood type stuff. And then all of a sudden trying to go to a race and that being Rockingham, North Carolina, and hopping in a car, there was no testing. There was no, there was nothing to really compare it to, except, probably one of the scariest things I think I ever did is hopped in with that race car. I was usually pretty cocky kid. I was confident in what I was doing, but I got in that race car and I said, wow, I've never done anything like this. It's going to take a lot of learning here. It's going to take a lot of learning to get this figured out. But I think because it was so difficult, it kept me challenged. But it took quite a while. Even if I had sat in Richard Petty's winning race cars of that era, there's no way I could have won a race. I didn't have the credentials. I didn't know what I was doing, and I had to learn. And had to learn without wrecking and without killing myself and killing somebody else.
Yeah.
You had to learn on the job, and it took a long time to get a feel for that.
Well, Steve, what do you think put Ricky over the top? You said that you had an opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of it might not be a big thing, but it is to me. Sometimes when you have drivers who win races and championships, what boils it down into putting them in the Hall of Fame is a singular achievement, something a little bit different. And in Ricky's case, for a long time, he held the record for a number of consecutive years with at least one victory. And that was noticed by a lot of people in those days, even Sports Illustrated, of all things. They had a section back then called By the Numbers, and I was reading it on an airplane, and it had a big number 14 up there, and it said 14, number of years NASCAR driver Ricky Rudd has won at least one race per season. I thought, well, if they know that, certainly that's got to be attached to Ricky as a very singular achievement. And on down the road, even though Rusty, passed him, fair enough, and Rusty got in the Hall of Fame ahead of him, by the way. I think that stuck in some voters' minds, particularly, guys like me who said, he did this, and when you stop and think about it, that is really something unique. See, that Sports Illustrated issue, I got off the plane. I don't know why Ricky was in the same airport, but there it was, it's Charlotte. That's Ricky. Come here, look at this. I want to show you this. And I showed him the Sports Illustrated. Ricky read it, and his eyes got wide, and he said, "Can I have this?" So, I'm sorry.
Come on, Wade.
Always me.
Well, here's my opinion. I think that the consistency and the win streak was certainly in your favor, but also Richmond, 84, and Martinsville, 98, 99?
Yeah, I think it's 98.
98. Whenever a hardcore old school race fan talks about how, racers used to be real men and all that kind of thing, without fail, they say, Ricky Rudd won a race at Richmond with his eyes taped open. They talk about Martinsville, and he was passed out in the car. He was comatose, and he still won the race.
Yeah.
But I really do think that those two things really kind of put you over the top.
That comes up quite a bit. What it takes to be a driver. But, I looked at it in those days. I wasn't trying to be a Superman. Actually, two things. I was trying to make sure that I didn't get fired from being, too sick on the job and laid out 2 or 3 weeks, because they'll forget about you pretty quick. But once you get through that, I look back at, people like, and I'm going to leave out some of these names, but you got Cale Yarborough. When I think toughness, I think of Cale. Seen him hands bleeding, get out of a race car, hands bleeding, no gloves. And Bobby Allison, Petty, and Yarborough. All these guys, and I'm leaving out some of the names, but those are the guys when I was, coming through the ranks, and those are the guys that were winning races. And I said, man, I want to be like these guys. But I really think that generation of drivers, if they were dealt the same cards that I had been dealt, they'd have done the same thing I did. I didn't look at it as being, trying to be Superman. I just looked at it as, hey, this is part of driving. You got to get your act together. You got to be tough on the track, and you can't let sort of little things keep you out. And so I think having those guys to before me to look up to. That's what I think. That's what I wanted to be like those guys, and so I did everything I could to try to be like them. And on the track, the toughness. I worked out in the gym, which early days there wasn't a whole lot of guys in the gym, and I'm one of the survivors that can say I boxed with Humpy Wheeler, and can live to tell about it. So that was my routine. We'd go in there, and we'd box a 30-minute round, and of course, it was big, heavy gloves. It was more of an aerobic deal than it was anything, but it stung enough you didn't want to get hit in the head, and you'd cover up. But and Humpy was just playing with us. He could have knocked me out at any time. But the training and stuff, that helped a lot too.
Well, I think you kind of drew the short end of the stick at Daytona, the flip and everything, and then going to Richmond the next week. I mean, it's kind of hard to wuss out on driving the race car when you're driving for a D-Day veteran.
Yeah, we that was one of the most entertaining things with Bud Moore is that, our routine, this is before the motorhomes and everybody kind of got hidden in their own, little cocoon of the motorhome. We go out to eat, we go to dinner, and I go with the team. We go and Bud would, now and then he might have a little drink cocktail for dinner, and we'd be on the beaches at Normandy and Omaha and listen to some of those stories. And man, you talking about what race car drivers had nothing on those guys that hit the beach and listen to Bud's stories. But yeah, Bud was an interesting guy. He was a big, intimidating guy, but he was actually, like Linda, my wife, would say, he's probably the biggest teddy bear you ever seen. He was he's gruff and rough, but there's a really, really neat spot on Bud Moore and his family. It made you feel part of that whole group.
When you started out, you raced the car for Rockingham with Bill Champion. Mm-hmm. He was your uncle, was he not?
No, he was a friend of mine. We all grew up in a neighborhood, kind of a fairly tight little residential neighborhood. And Linda, my wife, she lived down the street. This was when we were 10 years old, 12 years old. And behind her was a guy named Cliff Champion. All lived in the same little neighborhood. And Cliff Champion was Bill Champion's cousin, second cousin.
Okay.
So that's kind of how that connection got made. And Cliff was a volunteer helper, as my brother was, on Bill Champion's cars back in that day, early day. They were probably in their teens at the time as well.
Right.
And that's kind of how that got started. And Bill was just, he did all he could with the money he had to work with, but it was more of a start and park type operation in its day. Right. Same thing as Richard Childress, a very similar deal. And a lot of guys made their living doing that during that day. But I think Bill saw that he was getting tired, physically tired, and I got a chance to drive his car, and that's kind of how I got started.
Why did your family take up racing?
Well, my family started racing. There's 5 kids in my family. One brother and the rest were sisters. And when I came along, I was next to the youngest. So my dad had raced local tracks around the northern part of Carolinas on the coast, Wilson dirt tracks, and all kind of places around the Norfolk area. He raced with a guy named Joe Weatherly and Bill Champion in that era. And Joe Weatherly went on to become, Cup champion later on. But they all sort of raced in that area. And then my dad got married and started having kids. And then I think my mom put it to him, we'll have kids and we stay married, or you can get rid of that race car and help, raise these kids. And so he did the smart thing at the time. He had a lot of kids coming, and back then money was hard to come by. So it got to the point, I think, groceries or we can go race. And I think my mom kind of put the law down to him. So my dad had a background in like local racing, and that's probably where it started. But I can remember being 9 years old going to professional go-karts races, very structured, very organized, and learning how to race at 8 years old. And the things were fast. Later on, we'd run over 100, 120 mile an hour on these go-karts. So speed was I had things I was afraid of, but speed was not one of them. And I think just early karting days,
Yeah.
You talked earlier about getting in the car the first time and kind of it being an eye-opening experience. How long did it take you to feel like, okay, maybe I do belong here after all?
Let me see. I think my career was 30 years long, and about 30 years, before you feel comfortable. No, it took seat time, a lot of seat time. These kids today, they're pretty amazing. There's a lot of talent out there, but I've always thought that and knew that kids at a young age could have the not experience, but have the ability to drive a race car fast. What hurt a lot of guys in my era, when I came along, I was 18. The next youngest guy was probably in their 30s, just the way the system worked. These guys would go, they run local short track races, they run your Hickories and Langley Fields and places like that. And then they work to become track champion or, run successfully on that local level and hoping that they can draw sponsorship. And then eventually they can move on to the big leagues of the Cup division. But it was very few guys really made it because it was so expensive. But at that time, it took these guys a pretty good time age-wise. They already aged before they got there. So I'm 17, 18 years old. Next youngest guys are in their mid-30s. And I was like a fish out of water. I didn't fit in, didn't have a place there. But I knew the main thing I had to do is just, don't cause any wrecks. Be smart, get your seat time. And I did. I just paid my dues and paid attention and got a little bit better, a little bit better. And then I think it was like 160 races before I won my first race. But I think just it took a lot of track time. But these kids today, they're running 900 horsepower midgets at 12, 13 years old.
Yeah.
So they hit the leagues here, NASCAR now, even a Cup level, and they're capable of running up front. They got to learn the routine and stuff, but they're very capable. But the biggest difference between now and then, and I would say it probably took me longer to learn to analyze what the race car is doing. So back in our era, you were the computer. You were the guy behind the wheel. And I learned a lot from a guy, he's long gone now, James Hilton. He would get in my car when I go to the Cup races, and he would get him to shake it down, make sure it's doing what it should be doing. He said, yeah, it's doing everything. Just go out there and get some seat time. But he described it to me as you can't go out there and run 100% in practice. Go run 90%. Come in, and now you can debrief with the crew chief and tell him what the car is doing, what it needs to do better. He said, if you're running 100% in practice, white knuckled, you're not going to know the feedback to give the crew chief. So a good part of that curve was just learning how to give information so the crew chiefs can make the adjustments to make the car better. Well, now you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Your computer, they got testing, they got simulation models. So now these guys get in these cars. That's eliminated all that track time that's necessary to learn how to debrief with a crew chief.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry about that now. So it's a different league right now. It's a whole different sport.
Junie Donnelly was your first full-time team owner.
Yep.
We all know he's a Virginian too. But how did that come about?
Well, I'm trying to think how that did work. Dick Brooks was a driver for Junie for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And Junie was in Richmond, which was about 100 miles from where I grew up in Chesapeake. And I think the way we got, I'm trying to think how this worked. I think Junie needed a driver, and I think we agreed to help pay the tire bill or something like that. Or some kind of, Junie had to have money to come in and operate. But he did it. He had a very good operation with all volunteer help. And it was a really neat place because these guys were there because they wanted to be there. It wasn't because they had a day job, but they'd come in at night. Junie had opened the shop about 5 or 6 at night, and they worked about midnight every night. And so all that volunteer help that came from the day jobs were, machinists, quality machinists, and brilliant people. But I got a chance to drive for Junie. And the very first time we show up at a racetrack, I think we go to Daytona, and I come in off the racetrack, and I grab a creeper. I'm going under the car. We knew we needed to change some shock absorbers, so I'm going under the car to help change shocks. And Junie come up. I think he might have grabbed me by the feet and eased me out from under the car. I said, "Yeah, Junie, what's going on?" He said, "Bubba, go over there and sit on the back of the truck." He said, "We got guys that can change these shocks for you." I said, "Well, I'm always used to helping. We were always short of help. I don't know if I drive a car that I change shock absorbers on, really, but somebody had to do it. But Junie had people that could do it. So, but Junie, when I went to Junie, I'd only raced 2 or 3 short NASCAR short tracks. We just didn't run many of them then. And so Junie was a coach as much as he was a car owner. He would get on top of the truck and he said, he had radios, and, you need to get a little deeper in the corner. You need to brake with your right or left foot, switch over and trail brake. And basically a driving instructor. Junie helped a lot of people to get around the racetrack better.
So I'm in the process of scanning all the old Grand National scenes. actually have scanned all the Grand National scenes now. So it's funny to go back in time and look at some of the stories. And I remember one in particular where you actually went to drive for a guy by the name of Nelson Malik. And then you left Nelson Malik pretty quickly. And the reason in the paper was the car just wasn't safe.
Yeah.
And for a car not to be safe back in that era.
Yeah.
I know about this car.
Just how unsafe was that car?
Well, it was good equipment, but even good equipment, you got to change parts. You know, there's a lot of preventive maintenance that has to happen. Well, they were based in Ohio. As a matter of fact, Dick Brooks drove that car some, and I seemed like I was following Dick Brooks around. So when Dick Brooks stepped out of it, and that car was available, I should have told you something right there. But you know, I don't want to beat these guys up. They did what they could, what they had to work with, but they were racing out of Ohio, and it was just like two guys working on this car, so they had to be wore out. So I can see why the parts didn't get changed. But we broke a ball joint at Talladega, and the car was running okay. The car was pretty quick. They had good motors, but it actually broke a ball joint, which Moog chassis parts gives you ball joints. And everyone before the speedway race, you're supposed to change them. And they actually, at that time, the tech inspection, they made you show that you changed the ball joints. You had to have papers showing you x-rayed or magnaflux all the suspension parts. Well, I had one of the officials call me off to the side a little bit after that. He said, Rick, he said, they had their paperwork. He said, but I can tell you those parts weren't changed on that car. There's grease left on the car parts from the last race. You know, when you magnaflux them, you got to clean everything up. He said, it wasn't. He said, they had their paperwork, but he said, I wouldn't. And then we ended up breaking a ball joint. That's when we run 200 mile an hour and I broke a ball joint. Basically just take the steering wheel, pitch it out the window. It doesn't do anything when you break a ball joint. You can't steer it. So it was a wake up call. So I said, as bad as I want to drive, I can't. I got to step out of this car before it hurts somebody. Hurts me.
How did the infamous Dygard situation arise? Now we know that Darrell fought tooth and nail to get out of that deal, which he did.
Yeah.
And they had something available, of course, in 1981. Why did they approach you, or did they?
I was cheap. You know, I drive for food. You know, back in that day, you had to pay people.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what they didn't hardly pay me anything. But you know, it wasn't really hard to figure out. I could go drive for Dygard, which everybody. I mean, I knew that it was a one-sided contract, and it wasn't. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist to learn that. You know, I was getting myself into paperwork that wasn't very complimentary. But I wasn't doing it for the money. I was doing it for experience. And at that time, Darrell had just stepped out of the car. So and Robert Yates was building motors. So there were some things at Dygard. I mean, the team itself was a solid team when I went for them. They weren't like cutting back at that point. And Gatorade was a sponsor. I think I signed like a 10-year contract, you know, making literally, you know, like 10 or 15% of the purse. Back then, 40% was pretty the standard. So anyway, I mean, it wasn't about the money; it was about seat time. And Jake Elder was going to be the crew chief over there, and Robert Yates building motors. It wasn't, you know, it was a pretty good place to go. So I could either do that, or I could go back, and my delivery spot at Al Rudd's junkyard was still available. I've probably been head of delivery. Head of deliveries. I'd have gone and stayed with my dad because he was. I think he even moved up. He had 2 delivery trucks then, so I'd have been head of deliveries at Al Rudd's Used Auto Parts. So it was that or go drive for Gatorade. You know, so I said, well, it's not real hard to figure this one out. So, but about the same time it happened by accident, we go to Charlotte Motor Speedway, and that's a story in itself. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but basically we had a family-run car right before the Dygard. That's what got the Dygard opportunity going. Was there was everybody in our little group that had raced. We won Rookie of the Year as a family operation, and it wasn't everybody had day jobs. They worked around the clock at night, but everybody was tired. We won the Rookie of the Year, so basically everybody physically couldn't go on like that. So the team pretty much came to an end. So we had a Monte Carlo that was built by Banjo Matthews back in the day, a good race car. It was sitting there in the shop. 1980, we're into 1980, and I think I just left that Nelson Malik deal. So Linda and I were living in Norfolk, Chesapeake, and we ended up moving to Charlotte, North Carolina. We got an apartment, a 1-bedroom condo, an apartment in downtown Kannapolis. And we carried that race car with us. Linda, my wife, went and got a job. She was working in the ticket office selling tickets at Charlotte Motor Speedway. And then DK Orvich was my brother-in-law at the time, had a nice shop right next to the Speedway. So basically we carried up Monte Carlo up there. It was just pretty much me and Linda. She worked a day job, and I worked, whatever you had to do to get the race car ready. And we carried it over to Charlotte Motor Speedway for the October race. They had a practice session a week before the official opening. So we went over there, and I was about 60 cars running, and we were probably about 20th fastest on there in the cars that were there. And Harry Hyde comes walking through the garage area, and he stops at my car. And Harry was like a legend. I was kind of intimidated to even talk to him, but Harry stops and talks to me. I said, wow, this is pretty neat. And he says, Ricky, if you don't mind, I'd like to look under your car. If you don't mind, I'll roll under there and see if I'd like to take a look, see if I can help you. He goes in there, spends about 10 minutes, comes back out, he's taking notes. He said, I see you're running pretty good. He said, but I see some things right here that I can help you run better. He says, I'd like to help you. I said, well, Harry, I appreciate it. I don't have any money. He said, well, take my car. If you want to do this, it won't cost you anything. We'll do it for nothing. He said, take that car over to across the street, which is the Rick Hendricks's complex today. And there used to be one building over there, and that's where Harry Hyde worked out of. So we bring the car over to Charlotte Motor Speedway across the street after practice is over. And I would go there and work on the car, getting it ready, help work on it. Jimmy Maycar, who ends up being today, he runs Joe Gibbs Racing, but Jimmy was Rusty Wallace's crew chief back when he won the championship. So Jimmy was a young kid out of Delaware helping Harry. Randy Dorton comes over, and he's looking at the motor. Randy Dorton was the head engine builder at Hendricks forever and unfortunately passed away in a plane crash. So I had superstars in their very beginnings helping to tune that car for the next week. And then Harry's up in there in the dyno room, and he's climbing on top of the motor, looking at it when they're running it on the dyno at full RPM. So anyway, we basically took that team, went over to Charlotte Motor Speedway the following week, and we qualified on the outside pole and finished third or fourth in the race. And that's what that one race opened the doors for the Dygaard phone call to start happening. And then Harry came to me a little bit late, but he wanted, and I wished I'd have gone a different route, but Harry had found sponsorship, but it arrived like a week too late. I'd already signed a Dygaard deal. Terry had a deal. He could run out of his shop. He found some money to run the team. But anyway, it was just a matter of fact, the pit crew that day was Dale Earnhardt's brother was he was a tire changer on the team. It was kind of a makeshift of everything, but it was a heck of a good put together operation for one race.
Now, I've always heard that I don't know if it was a lawyer's office or there at the shop at Dygaard, but from what I understand, there was an incident, or not an incident, but there was a point where Darrell was coming out of a meeting, mm-hmm. and you supposedly were sitting there, and he said, "It's all yours, kid."
Yeah, he said.
What was that situation?
It was a pretty quick deal. I think he was happy. He'd just gotten out of his contract, and I'm signing the paperwork, to get. I think he said, "Good luck," and something like, "You're going to need it," or something like that, because I was going in the office. It wasn't like you're going out the shop. You're going in the office to do paperwork. So, and that deal was really, what really hurt us on that thing was they downsized the cars that year to they went from the big long, the big Bertha they called the car that Darrell won all those races with. So I wasn't going to get to drive. I actually only drove that car one race. And we went to Riverside, California, the first race with the old cars. You could run the old style or the new style. I went there to Riverside, California with and drove that Darrell's famous car, Bertha. And darn if we didn't qualify third and was leading the race with about 10 laps to go and would have won the race. Bobby Allison, we had Bobby covered that particular day. He ended up winning the race. We blew him over with like 9 or 10 laps to go. But that was the big car. Then after that, we went to the short cars, and even Jake Elder, one of the most famous crew chiefs in racing, he was everybody was stumped with that car because it was completely different than anything we'd run. And you got a fairly rookie driver driving this car. My feedback wouldn't have been as good as Darrell's, obviously. I mean, Darrell had a lot of seat time. So we were like, it was a hard year, tough year. We did okay, bunch of poles, tied Darrell for the most poles that year, I think, and never won a race, finished second and third, but never won a race. And so when the end of the year comes along, and Dygaard, they got me so cheap, they wanted to keep me. This is before multi-car teams came along. So they wanted to keep me, and they brought Bobby Allison in, and I would have stayed there had it been in that under the same roof. But they were going to basically, one of the starting park guys, they were going to farm me out to do a starting park. And they said, Bobby's going to only run about a year, and then we'll bring you back. You'll be seasoned, which, I said, hey, I'd rather take my chances on my own. Thank you, but no thank you. And it was going to be sticky, but I didn't have anything. They couldn't sue me. I had no money. So I said, hey, you can't make me drive this race car. And I'm just letting you know up front, I'm not driving that car that you got me farmed out to. I'll take my chances. And that's how the Richard Childress thing popped up. I was out of work. Here we are in January. Richard needed a driver. Greg Sachs got hurt in the Daytona test, about killed himself. Yeah. And Richard needed a driver. And that's kind of how the Childress thing got started.
If you could be careful with your hands beating on the table.
Oh, yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, no big deal.
No, I'm sitting there thumping on that piece of plastic.
It makes the bottle.
Said something earlier. I was getting all wound up.
Now, if you drove Bertha,
yeah,
I think you said one race.
One race. Mm-hmm.
Did you get to drop buckshot out of the frame rail?
No, Daryl didn't tell me about all that one this evening. I looked all over for that button. I could never find that thing.
So you go ahead.
Daryl said he only used it one time. Sure.
Yeah. That was, I can honestly say I never really came along when, I found out later, these guys had this and they had that and they had this. And I said, well, how do we even run on the same track with these guys? They're running 300 pounds light and we're not. And I don't know. It just, I look back now. And or maybe I was driving for teams later on and it was happening. I just didn't know it.
Well, of course, I know a story about Dale running those 11 races with RC, and then you come aboard the next year. How did all of that come about?
Yeah, well, the Richard Childress deal started, like I said, when I got my release from Diagard. And that didn't happen until like January, maybe it was December at New York. That's when it was. We went up to New York and we met with the Gatorade sponsor, Bill Stokely, owned the Gatorade at the time. And he had some lawyers with him and stuff, and it might have even been on a conference call up there. Basically, when Bill Stokely, once he understood I wasn't going to drive, and he was real good about it. He said, "Well, we are not going to hold you to it. We'll let you out of that 10-year contract, whatever it was." He said, "I don't think it's your best interest to stay put with this team right now." So he was real good about it. So I, Richard Childress either called me or I called Richard. Is when Greg Sachs got hurt in the winter testing at Daytona. So Richard calls me up, says, "Hey, Ricky, come talk to me. I'd like to have you maybe run some races for us." Greg got hurt, can't do it anymore. Of course, Earnhardt left and went to, at that time, he went to Bud Moore.
Yeah.
So, but Earnhardt left Childress to go to Bud Moore. But, they didn't, when Earnhardt came to Richard the first go round, I think it might have been in the middle of a season somewhere.
It was.
Yeah, and it was, Richard didn't have a chance to get cars together like he needed and get the crew together, and they didn't do that well. And then Dale basically bailed out. And then when Richard called me, he says, "I'll go to meet Richard in his shop in Winston, or actually Welcome, North Carolina." And he says, "Hey," I said, "Richard, how many races can you run?" He says, "Well, I've got enough money. If we go to Daytona and we do really well," he says, "we can maybe run 6 races." And so I said, "Well, 6 is better than none." So yeah, I'm on board. And he says, "But if something comes along, we're going to try to run a season." So we get started, getting ready to go to Daytona. About a week before Daytona, he gets a call from the Piedmont Airlines guys and said, "Hey, we're going to like to put the money up and have you carry our colors." So it all kind of came together, and Richard started building his team. And in the first year, we sat on I think the first race, we sat on a pole at Daytona. We didn't win the pole. We outside pole, and Cale turned upside down qualifying. And so we were outside pole. We got moved to the pole that day. And I think we won the first 4 poles of the year that year in a row. I think we won Rockingham, Bristol, Daytona, inherited Daytona, but considered a pole. But there was another one. The first 4 poles of the year, I believe, in 1982, we won those first 4 poles. Might have been Riverside then. Might have been the first race. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
it was.
And that's how that was the other race. So anyway, it just started clicking, and then we blew a lot of motors that year, broke a lot of motors. Come out the next year, switched to Chevrolet, and we won 2 races that year and did well. Still had some engine problems. I I can't remember. We broke some motors and stuff. Back then, that was not all that uncommon to break motors, but it seemed like we broke them at inopportune times.
Yeah.
So anyway, we won Martinsville. I think we won Riverside that year.
Yeah.
And we're all set to go, looking good. The season's winding down, and then I get a call. Actually, Mike Curb told me that, hey, they just hired Earnhardt to drive your car. I said, what? I said, yeah, he's going to drive the 3 car. And I didn't know about it until Mike Curb told me about it.
Really?
Yeah. At Charlotte. It's October in Charlotte. That's when I found out about it. It was a big letdown, big disappointment, obviously. But, hey, that's, stuff happens, move on.
Well, that first win, that was at Riverside.
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I correct? Well, first, for the obvious question is, how did you feel to finally take that checkered flag?
Oh, I really liked driving for Richard. Linda, my wife, was on the pit crew. And Richard took care of his people. I mean, just real quick, on the end of the year, she gets a bonus check in the mail. And well, Richard, what's this for? She said, well, you keep pit laps. You're in the sun. You're down there helping fuel mileage, and you're working. You're part of this crew. She says, well, yeah, but that's for the guys. He said, you're right in there with them. This is your cut. No, I'm not going to argue with this. Take that money and go. It wasn't. I mean, it was in the 100 category, but still, the thought of it, to include her in on that. But the first win. Let's go back. I think when I first came to Richard, it might have been the winter 82, getting ready to go into the 83 season. They used to have a race at Texas Motor Speedway. And it was outlaw race, whatever you want to call it, but we raced against, I'm thinking Terry Labonte might have been driving in that race at that time. It had been his Texas operation. It wasn't, when he had the big time stuff. But I think Neil Bonnet was there. Bobby Allison ran. But it's kind of a stopover point. Seemed like we'd run the West Coast and stop in Texas on the way back. Anyway, we stopped in there. And we ended up winning a race at Texas College Station. It used to be a cup track, and then at that time it came off the schedule. But it was considered a big non-NASCAR event. And we won that race. And Richard found out later. He said you were almost there, but your confidence wasn't there. I had to show you that you could win, and you had to have a taste of it. And really that helped. And we came out the next year. We won 2 races. So it was a neat place. And as far as victory lane the first time, it changed a little bit because I remember winning, and we had a pretty dominant car that day. But there was no victory lane. The cables for the cameras wouldn't reach to where the victory lane was set up, so we had to stop in the middle of the racetrack on pit road and do the victory lane get together there. But it's nothing like the first win. But it was a big day for sure.
When it was over for Sugars, as you found out, what led to the next step? Now, I've always been told that Wrangler had a big part in trying to get both you guys to run, and it sort of led to a Bud Moore, you, and Richard Childers Dale.
I mean, it looked pretty neat from the outside, Dale and Richard were good buddies. I mean, they were best friends for years. They hunted together, they spent all the time together. And people don't realize it that Dale and I we come to Charlotte. When I first started coming to Charlotte, when we had our family car, Dale was, you talking about a hard worker. He come in his ex-father-in-law shop, Robert G. And his day job, he was welding up gasoline tanker trucks. He's inside of a gasoline tanker truck welding cracks during the day. And he come to work at his father-in-law's, ex-father-in-law's house, Robert G's house, at a shop in the backyard. And he come in the door and had a bottle of Jack Daniels and a Sun Drop. And he sit him on the counter. And he didn't get drunk, but he had 2 or 3 shots of liquor and chased it with Sun Drop. And he was working on my race car. It was a race car that Robert G had sold us, and I'd wrecked it or done something to it. But anyway, Robert ends up, he's in there, and we started knowing each other then. Later on, he, obviously he, made it, won the championship, and money started coming. And so we had a friendship that went back there. And then we would come to town. We would stay at his house for Charlotte, I think Rockingham, Wilkesboro. We stay down there, basement, had a bedroom down there. Lynn and I would stay there and stayed at his house there on the lake. And we at one time we were pretty close. Of course, when that Richard Childers split happened, and we kind of, we had. I think I had more bad blood toward it than he did. But anyway, the Bud Moore thing came along. So basically, I'm out of work, and basically the sponsorship, like you were saying, there was 2 Wrangler cars out there, and it looked really neat. 2 Wrangler, 1 Chevrolet, 1 Ford. And we'd actually have to go to photo shoots and stuff together once a year, and I was interested. But anyway, I think they made him shave his mustache off on one of those deals, and I think he felt naked. He ended up growing it back pretty quick, but they made him do that. I don't know. So it looked like he had two clean-cut looking drivers. I'm not sure what their plan was, but that was a sponsor-dictated thing. But yeah, that was kind of a neat deal. I got a chance to drive. It wasn't all. It didn't end up totally bad. I ended up getting to drive for the legend of Bud Moore, and experience that operation, and stayed there 3 or 4 years, I think, at Bud's. But that's kind of, it looked neat, the switch, but it was more difficult than it probably appeared. But Wrangler, like you say, they were able to smooth things over, and nobody sued each other, and everything went smooth, but it all worked out pretty good.
Okay.
All right, so we mentioned it earlier, but the 1984 Busch Clash. Is there a question about that incident, that wreck, that you've not answered or been asked that you've always wanted to tell your side of the story of?
On the Busch Clash, no, I mean, not really. I mean, I remember racing and getting turned sideways, coming off a 4, doing a crazy flip. I remember going up in the air and thinking I was going to land in the Goodyear Tower for a minute. And if you look at the video, the thing turns like a 45-degree angle. And so it had to be somebody, divine intervention, whatever, for that car to change its direction. But anyway, it hit the ground, and I don't remember much after that. I just remember that I remember it. Didn't hurt right away, but I remember once I came to, and I had a guy tell me that, I don't know if this is true or not, but he told me he was the first one got to me. He was a NASCAR official. His name was WW, they called him, Walter. From him and Doyle Ford used to ride from Nashville, Tennessee to all the races. They helped NASCAR. They showed up for weekend help. But he was a respiratory therapist at the hospital in Nashville. He was one of the first ones to get to me. And he said he took a pulse and there wasn't anything happening.
Wow.
And there's something that they can do. It's like a thump on the jugular vein. They thump you. And he said as soon as he thumped me, he said, I come right to it, and I was just like talking and everything. So I never got a chance to confirm that. But anyway, I knew that I was very lucky. I knew that, first of all. But, the night in the hospital, and wanted to keep me there a week. And basically, I was leaving the hospital. They can't really keep you. What's kind of amazing, though, is back then, NASCAR, if you could get in the window, you were legal to drive. There was no rules about concussions. So basically, I was back at it again. 2 days later, it rained the next day. So it was 2 days later, I was back in the car. But that's when I guess the famous duct tape deal got started. But you're fishing for something, so I'm not really quite sure what you're fishing for. But that was a lot of happened in that very short period of time.
No, I'm not necessarily fishing for anything. I'm just sure that you've told that story a million times.
Yeah.
And sure, you get tired of talking about it. But again, I really think it was the beginning of your reputation as the Iron Man.
Well, I can see. I don't want to bore you guys with details, but I remember being in the hospital. I woke up shortly after they got me on a stretcher when I woke up, and I remember them working on me. And I said, "Man, why are you working on my arms? My arm's fine." I said, "Man, my chest, my ribs are hurting. I think I broke ribs," and they're working on my arm and stuff. But later on, in the video, you see the arm out of the car, and how that car didn't roll over on my arm,
right.
I'll never know. Because the window net broke down. Well, what happened, and that wreck happened, the seat was a 2-part seat. The bottom of the seat broke out. So basically, I was loose in the car. The shoulder belts basically weren't even there. You could put 2 people under the belts. So I was basically loose in the car. Then the lap belt helped me in. And then the window net, it didn't do much. But I remember going to the hospital that night. And then, of course, they give you all kind of painkiller and stuff. I sure loaded you up with stuff. So I feeling pretty good. And I'm laying in the bed, and my wife Linda's looking at me. She says, "I know what it was." The conversation came up. I got to get out of here. I got to be at the track. And she listened to that for a little bit, and she finally says she was tired of hearing it. So she says, "Get out of this bed. If you can get out, I'll help you walk over to the mirror." So I walked over to the mirror, and I looked at the person, and I didn't recognize who was looking back, because at that time, my face was really swollen up, about twice the size, and my eyes looked like they were bleeding, and my arm, actually, I saw running across the video. I didn't know my elbow was actually bleeding and banged up pretty good. But she says, so I walked over to the mirror. She walked me back. She said, "What do you think now?" I said, "I think I'll spend the night. I'll try this tomorrow." And it literally went just like that. And the next morning we woke up and it was raining. But I went back got up, checked myself out, got out of the hospital. But it was more about, I think, worried about. I had all the, being let go from a job, and I fell into a good spot with Bud Moore, and it's basically my first day on the job. It's be like, NFL quarterback and getting hurt the first game. Anyway, and there's people lined up, for that spot, and I said, any way I can do it, I got to get in this car. And for two things, worried about not having a job, and not knowing if I could drive it or not, and didn't know until I got on the racetrack, and that was 2 days later, and I ran about 3 laps and came in. I said, Bud, I got something's happening here. I don't know if I can't see or what it is. And him and I talked about it. And we get up and walk over to the toolbox, and there was a duct tape sitting there. And he said, well, your face is awful swollen. He said, you think those eyes are they're closing up for you got vertical G at Daytona. You don't get lateral, you get vertical. He said, maybe those big old baggy eyes are, blocking your vision. So I don't know. And the next thing we know, the tape breaks out, and I start working on getting them taped open and go back out. And hey, I'm like new again. I can see again. And from then on, the rest of the week, and there was a lot of pain and stuff. And Humpy Wheeler's brother, David Wheeler, was a college football coach. He came down from Charlotte area and brought a flak jacket. I think flak jackets were new in that day. University of Florida football had them. It was a lot of people jumped in there. The local high school let me use their hot tub set up for athletes at the high school, Maitland High School, I guess it was, and ice. And so I was going through, when I went in the car, I was over there in the hot tub and then getting ice therapy and heat. And so David Wheeler was the one that kind of got me patched up for that weekend, and came to Richmond the next week to help me also.
We talked about Bud Moore, and you also talked about feeling the pressure of this being a good ride, and people lined up to take it away. What did Bud say? Did you feel like you had any pressure from Bud to get back in the car?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, opposite of that. Bud was, it's kind of hard to describe. Bud was like a father type guy. He was, he'd look at you and, I don't remember him saying, "Are you sure you want to do this?" But, no, there wasn't any pressure. If there's pressure from within, I think anybody in racing, and people, they talk about pressure, but it's the pressure you put on yourself. To not just to be okay. It's not good enough. That type of pressure, no different than a normal athlete that puts on themselves. You want to be the best you can be. And I didn't know if I could even operate, and I was able to drive that race. The following week, though, I think I went to Rockingham, and I had more trouble at Rockingham than I did at Daytona.
How did you blink? How did you?
I don't know. I say, when I say that, I watch you just do that. I watch you blink.
Yeah.
And everything above your eyelid. I say it wasn't like you just slapped duct tape on. You had to. My eyelid would still blink, but everything above the eyelid. It was like a cheap facelift, I guess. They pulled it right on back. Back then, it had to be hard because I had hair then.
Yeah.
But to get that duct tape to stick, I'm not even sure. But it all worked out, and that became the routine for a couple of weeks in a row with the tape. But it wasn't like you taped your eyelid. The eyelid would still work. You could still blink.
Yeah.
But the swollen part, the big bags were, almost like a fighter gets cut. I remember watching them years ago. They'd cut you, to get rid of all that excess skin out there. Right. A good thing Bud didn't have a razor knife handy. He would have reached. And as tough as Bud is, he would have probably reached for that. If I'd have seen the tape, I'd have taken the easy way out. But Bud might have gone for the razor knife.
Along comes Richmond. You're taped up. You're blacked up. Everything. Yeah. Nobody expects you to do much of anything in that race. Yeah. They're happy if you just survive it. But that's not the way it happened.
Yeah, no, it went really well. Plus I was at hometown track. Yeah. I used to love Richmond, the old fairgrounds, and I think I'd have passed Darrell Waltrip, which is not an easy character to pass in that day on the short track driving. I guess he was driving the juniors cars. Yeah, had to pass him on the outside, which happened to be where our car would work. It wasn't as big a deal as it sounded. I couldn't run the bottom, but I could run the top. So I remember, I think we had passed on about 20 laps to go. But what led up to that, I spent about 3 days at the University of Virginia Hospital in Richmond, going through tests, trying to figure out why was I dizzy? Why would one eye when I had lateral G load, why would one eye cross over the other one? So I had some pretty good guys. A guy named Dr. Albright, I remember that name, was a guy that worked with me. And basically he said, it's head trauma. You've had a major concussion. This could last a week. It could last 6 months. It could last permanently. You know, we don't know about head injuries. And that's basically, we did all kind of function tests. But basically, you know, you definitely would have probably been, first of all, you would have never told NASCAR back in their day anyway, because they had that protocol coming along with the NASCAR, with the concussion protocol they introduced later. And everybody, I think everybody had the same mentality that I did, is they wanted you to take that test when you were halfway normal, which I don't know if anybody's really all that normal that drives these race cars. So anyway, they wanted to take that cognitive test. And then if you have a concussion, then you're expected to take it over. And if they've seen a drop in performance, you're out. You got to sit out. So, you know, I mean, that sounds great, but that doesn't pay the bills, you know, sitting out.
Do you remember giving Steve the quote at Richmond? He asked you what you were doing for the pain.
Yeah.
And you said three lines of cocaine a day.
Oh, did it? Did I? I don't remember that. I don't.
Okay, all right.
No, I don't. I mean,
right.
If I said it, I said it, but I don't remember it.
Okay, all right. Well, he quoted you. He might have just made it up. I don't know.
Booze, okay. Cocaine, no.
No. I mean, no. I mean, I've never.
In no way do I think.
No. But what I'm saying, that concussions are weird things. I mean, I've had. When you say that, I remember. I said I did this. I don't remember it. I was knocked out at Michigan one time, and I was out in the hospital at Michigan. I was asleep, and I remember. I don't remember it. They said I think I had to be driving for Rick Hendricks, I guess.
Yeah.
And I came. I said something to Rick, and all the ladies were standing. I didn't see it. I remember saying something about. Well, I'll tell you later. But something just crazy off the wall.
Yeah.
And then later on, they told me, I didn't remember seeing that, but I remember waking up on the helicopter going to the Michigan hospital. But anyway, you know, at least that's my excuse, concussions. I'll blame it on that anytime I do something.
Is it okay if I ask you about that and then you talk about maybe having a concussion? Or would you rather just...
I'd rather stay away. The reason I said, because I'm always kind of far away from that, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not saying I didn't say it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. I've always
Tim
thought,
Richmond, that would be a normal everyday story, you know. But yeah, I can't believe I said
yeah,
that.
that's my all-time favorite quote
Really?
in Grand National
Yeah.
Scene. But yeah, well,
Probably was, but I swear I don't remember that.
okay, all right.
Well, when
Thanks
you
for
won
asking.
that race, basically, you had to know you did something very special to win under those conditions. Lord knows everybody else did.
You know, I look back at it, Steve, and I think back, you know, I can't imagine doing that today, you know, at my age and stuff. Would I do it? I guess I'm still the same character. I probably would have, you know, but it was no question that I didn't want to just be at Richmond. Richmond was sort of my hometown, you know, Virginia crowd. A lot of people came up, people I went to school with. And I was able to perform that day. I really don't remember having any issues other than rib pain. But that got, you know, you could kind of deal with that, you know, after a while. But, I mean, then it got to be, hey, I got a shot at winning this thing. And you're talking about the best painkiller in the world. And it got me through later on in life at Martinsville when I was getting burned up on the seat. It is no way to tell you how much adrenaline, what it can do for you. And all of a sudden, nothing matters but, you know, hey, we're going to win this. Got a shot at winning it. If I don't screw up, get overexcited. But pain and all that's gone. It's just focused on winning that race. And I had no pain that day, you know, once I got in. Now, later on, yeah, I felt it. But at that late stage of the race, there wasn't any pain there.
At some point, I don't necessarily know that. Test. Okay. At some point, you developed the rooster persona. I don't know if that was with you in the beginning, but it seemed like in the mid-1980s you started taking up for yourself a little bit. I know that Steve loves to tell a story about you and Joe Ruttman at Martinsville. You know, everybody remembers you and Dale at North Wilkesboro, 88, 89. Was there a specific moment when you flip that switch, or was that always there and you just didn't have the chance to show it?
Yeah, I don't really feel like I did anything any different. It seemed like as you drive along, and your career lasts as long as mine, it used to be frustrating a lot to, I made it a point to not drive over my head when I was learning. Let it come to me, and I mean, I'm sure I made some mistakes. I know I did, and other guys got wrecked because of that. But I remember your patience tends to wear thinner as you go along, and you say, why wouldn't these drivers be a little smarter about that? The silly stuff. I'm not talking about veteran stuff, but silly stuff that people make. Your patience tends to wear thin, and I think because at one time you wouldn't have maybe but one NASCAR rookie a year come along, maybe two in a season, pretty much. I mean, and then all of a sudden you're getting 5 and 10 guys showing up at one time, and it just seemed like we had a lot more wrecks and stuff that were unnecessary. And I don't know if maybe that had something to do with it, but I didn't go looking for trouble. My goal was to take that car on a given day, earn my money, try to win the race. You couldn't win the race, you try to run second, and don't settle for anything, and get that car as high as you can get it. And even if you knew a lot of times that once you start that race, there's no way in the world we're going to see victory lane, but I'm going to race my butt off to get in the top 10. You just did that. But as far as the rooster thing, I think I was driving. That came later, really. The nickname was from Richard Broom, which happened when I owned my car somewhere in the mid-'90s. But, again, didn't look for trouble, didn't want trouble, but sometimes you just had to stand your ground. And if you didn't, you get run over every week, and that's just kind of an unwritten rule. And, and I think back maybe some of the Earnhardt stuff we got into, and hey, I didn't go looking for trouble, but sometimes there's only way to settle is an eye for an eye. And that was kind of the unwritten rule. And believe it or not, people sort of abided by that. And it sounds simple, but it kind of worked in its day. But you couldn't be timid if someone, you can tell if someone's trying to, rough you up or trying to cheap shot you, or, it's just a lot of unwritten stuff, code of ethics that happened. Yeah. So I didn't do anything any different than I raced people the way I wanted to be raced. But if you had to get up on the wheel and give a cheap shot back to somebody that deserved it, well, you just had to do what you had to do. You had to make sure it got harder later on because you knew there were so many TV cameras everywhere watching. You had to. I remember short track days, we'd actually take an eye. Where are the cameras at? Where's the blind spots?
Really?
Yeah. I don't think I was by myself. I think there was somebody a lot better at it than I was. He used to drive a 3-car. He knew where the cameras were.
So, 88 and 89 at North Wilkesboro, most everybody knows that story. Did you still have residual, I guess, resentment over the 3-car? Or had that fallen
No, that had long gone over that. That had been long gone. But, basically, Dale was a tough competitor. I always thought he could have won almost as many races without having to take competition out. And he was, to me, he was very good at what he did. He would kind of size up everybody early in the race. And if he seen somebody was going to really be a threat early, he wouldn't wait to the end when the eyes are on. He would make sure he'd rough somebody up a little bit early on, maybe just knock a fender in where that guy lost his arrow. He'd tend to know who his competitors were going to be. He'd run a race backwards. He knew who he had to deal with early. He'd be dealing with them late unless he was able to nick him up a little bit, just wound him a little bit, not necessarily take him out, but wound him or set him back, get him a lap down. And now they're digging out of a hole. He was pretty good at that.
Larry McReynolds likes to tell the story about that 89 race and talking about the fans wanted them some Ricky Rudd. After that race, and you had to hide under a tarp or something.
I went out in Larry Mack's minivan because he used to park in the infield, and we'd always park out on the road where you could get out and get away from the traffic. So yeah, Larry had a minivan, and but you talk about that. I'd say half of that crowd that day, Larry is right, and they were ready to. It was the closest thing I'd ever seen to a riot. And, I don't think they probably had the police control to handle it. It could have gotten nasty. But I seen a lot of green shirts at the fence, cheering on, and I seen a lot of, black shirts at the fence. And it's amazing it wasn't a brawl in a crowd, But saw that on pit road. And, of course, when came down pit road. I think there's 2 incidents that happened at Wilkesboro that I can think of. One race, it wasn't as crazy a finish. The other one happened on the last lap. And that particular day, it was kind of scary. I was, for one time only in my whole racing career to ever think about this could get out of control. And I'm sure NASCAR thought the same thing. But anyway, that whole wreck deal that happened is, it was, I was going to win the race. I mean, I set Dale up late in the race. I had a better car than he had. We had trouble early on. That green car always ran good at Wilkesboro, no matter who drove it. Brett Bodine, I think, won there. But Larry Mack and Bob Riley, they always had a car that was really good there. So we got buried deep in the crowd early on. So late in the race, I finally catch Earnhardt. And I remember catching Dale, and the caution came out with about 10 laps to go. And as soon as I caught him, I just nudged him. Just something different he's not used to. So I remember just touching him. And he looked up in the mirror, and the caution's out. But before the caution came out. So, and I think it got him thinking that day, like, this is gonna be, I'm gonna have my hands full, because I ran him down, and then the caution come out. So we get the restart, and I sat there, and I said, I can't. If I pass him with 2 to go, he's gonna wreck me. I won't win the race. So I knew that I had to go down into turn 1, go square with him. I wasn't even gonna pass him. I was gonna stay square with him, because I didn't want to let me get out and then turn me. I had to stay door to door with him. So when we hit 3, I was going to be square with him. I already knew all this. I knew how it was going to unfold. What I didn't expect for him to come on down and pinch me all the way down at the bottom, and I couldn't turn any sharper. When I tried to turn, we both spun. He was spinning and I was spinning, and I looking back, there's arguments both ways. He should have held his line. Yet it's still, next to the final corner. He's going to do what he's going to do, and I got to do what I got to do. But I couldn't go any farther. The curve was down there. I had nowhere to go. So anyway, that was that. But the Wilkesboro, I think, prior to that was one that I'll remember that more than that one. That's another story. And I don't even know where we finished that day. He was at Wilkesboro late, about that same time period.
You talking about 88? Yeah.
Might have been 88.
Yeah.
And again, this was early in the race. And I'm not even leading the race at this time. I'm somewhere in the top 5. And all of a sudden, Dale spins me on purpose, turns me around. And now I'm at the back of the pack, almost lose a lap. Now, short track, it took forever on the green if you have to come back around. You didn't have these give me a position back when a caution comes out. Who's ever in a lap down gets a free lap. You had to race your way back. So it was a job on a short track. So I remember getting all the way back getting back near the front of the pack. And I remember there's Dale right there. And basically I repaid the favor. And he purposely turned me. I purposely turned him. And he does a half spin about like I did, didn't hit the wall. And I come in, the race is over. I think this was near the end. I come into the garage area, pull into the garage stall, and Bill France is standing in my stall when I get there, Bill Jr. He's standing there, he's got his arms crossed, like, and I said, uh-oh, this is going to be interesting. This spin had happened the later spin didn't happen. It happened where he couldn't dig himself out of a hole. So I basically paid the favor back, but it happened at a not a good opportune time for him if he's going to try to win the race. So anyway, I come into the pits, in the stall, everybody's getting out, net gets down, I get out of the car, and Bill's right there like, what was all that? What was all that going on out there? What was that with you and the 3 car? What was that about? I said, oh, you mean when he spun me early in the race, when he turned me around? No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about late in the race when you turned him around. He said, "What do you think about that?" And he said, "What do you have to say? What do you have to say for yourself?" And I looked at him. I said, "Bill, I'm really disappointed in myself. I really am." And he looked at me like, "Well, okay." And then I said, "I'm disappointed because I didn't run that son of a bitch through the wall." And I think that's when I made my mistake, because the next morning I got a fine. It was a fax machine, $10,000 fine, detrimental conduct, detrimental sport auto race. If I'd have went, my big mouth got me in trouble. If I had just been quiet, it would have saved me $10,000.
I think it's pretty well known that you and Dale didn't, today, drivers text each other and, hey, I'm sorry, and so on and so forth, and all that. I think it's pretty well known that the two of you didn't necessarily mend those fences.
Well, you say that, and you have to. I'm thinking back. We went, from '82 or '83 up until I guess to 2000 or so, not really being. You tolerated each other. Sometimes you're in the same photo you needed for something or whatever. But I mean, it wasn't like we were arch enemies. We didn't go looking for each other. But it wasn't. We were really close at one time, and that never came around. But it's an odd deal. We're leaving Rockingham, North Carolina, and he would either helicopter out or drive out. We're close to home. We would either land a little airplane across the street at Drag Strip and fly out. For some reason, we were both left Rockingham. It was the Rockingham. I think he got killed in 2000. I think it was
2001.
2001. So this would have been the last. You have to go back through the history, but it was the last Rockingham race of the year, not in the fall. And we're leaving, and we're trying to get in line. The lines are merging, and nobody's giving anybody an inch because of traffic. And finally, we come up beside a car, and he had tinted windows and stuff. And neither one of us is going to give for that spot. And he was crowding me, I was crowding him. Finally, he rolls the window down, the tinted window. It was Teresa sitting there, and Dale's across, and he's laughing. He's laughing. He said, you let me in. And then he says, "Where y'all going? Were y'all headed home?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You going to eat at home? You're going to eat along the way?" He says, "Why don't me and Teresa are going to go to P.F. Chang's and have dinner? Why don't y'all join us?" And I had Linda with me, my wife. So we said, "Yeah, we'll do that. Let's do that." So we went down there and had a kind of a piece meal, if you will. And when we left there, I had bought a piece of property, and he was going to send a bulldozer over and an operator. I said, "No, Dale, that's nice of you to do that, but I can make it work without it, but thank you." But anyway, that was kind of like a peace offering on both of us, and it was kind of. And then wasn't many months later. It was he died. So
the year you finished second in points,
mm-hmm.
the guy that won the championship was Dale, correct?
Who was there? I'm sorry.
Dale.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dale won the championship. We were second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, at the awards banquet, I'm trying to think how that went. I don't really remember. I don't remember as much animosity amongst each other, except on the racetrack, and it seemed like always be involved in short track racing. Dale ran up front pretty much every race, and we didn't get up front nearly as much as he did. But when we did, it seemed like a lot on the short tracks, and we'd always seem to find each other for some reason, and I don't know why. But I don't know. I mean, it was. All I want is the mutual respect, and I think we probably had that after that race when we both spun out.
All right. So 91, you're driving for Rick Hendrick,
mm-hmm.
and you go to Sears Point, and you win the race, Ricky.
Well, I thought we did.
You won that race.
Yeah, I thought we did.
What do you remember about that last lap?
I just remember we had Davey ended up, giving the win, but Davey wasn't really a great car that day. The pit sequence at Sears Point makes you or breaks you, and the sequence he was on gave him track position, but he hadn't had tires in quite a while. So our game plan with Waddell was to get have fresh tires and be charged to the end. Well, the gap was a lot bigger than we thought it was going to be. I don't remember having any trouble on pit road, but just a gap. So I had to run him down from quite a ways back. And it didn't look like we're going to catch him in time. But he was fading pretty hard. But I remember coming into the last corner, and I'm thinking, I'm coming in there as hard as I possibly can. And I think I'll get stopped. But Davey took a defense. He didn't take a defensive line. He took a line as if he had the racetrack to run by himself. Which basically, you come in there real late, you square the corner, you make a real wide turn, which sets you up to be pretty vulnerable. You really give a big target for the guy trying to run you down. Well, I had no intentions of running into him. He made such a square entrance, and I'm coming in there barreling like crazy down in there. And I get into Davey. I touch him, but he doesn't spin him. He turns sort of a half turn. He does a half turn, moves out, doesn't spin, goes, and he didn't get out in the grass, and he comes back. And I come across the start-finish line, white flag, come back around again, and I get a black flag. And Davey gets the checker flag. And even to this day, I'll never know what happened on that. It's like, I don't know if this ever happened before. Yeah, so no one's ever really seen that. But hey, it happened years ago. What can I do about it?
Well, the stunning thing was you were disqualified.
That's what I heard later. I didn't even know it. I got out of there. I was so upset. I just left. And I found out that not only did I not finish second, is that I finished last.
Yeah.
They put me at the back of the field. And I think the next morning, I think they made an announcement that I finished second. Nope. I mean, I never heard from anybody. I just, I read it in the paper, saw it on the news.
The NASCAR mantra for years was that they never took a win away from somebody. They wanted the race fans to lead the race knowing who the winner was.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, they didn't do that.
Yeah.
I thought that was highly unusual.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I still, I can't help but think about it because the fans remind me about it. But
And two a-hole podcast hosts.
yeah. I'm looking at it from my position. What can I do about it? I can't do a darn thing about it. And
Did you talk to NASCAR at all?
never heard from him.
Really?
Well, I mean, why should I? I mean, I'm thinking he don't want to talk to me. Why should I call France? I didn't. I was always. Matter of fact, I think Earnhardt was the person that warned me to stay away from that red truck. It used to be Winston's truck. Winston painted. Said stay out of the red trailer. And so anyway, no, I didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Years after that. Let me see. I'm trying to think. That'd have been about 3 or 4 years later. I remember being once a year or twice a year. NASCAR invites people down to their compound down in the Bahamas, and I was invited to go down there. But that race is like it never happened. Have no idea to this day how it happened and why they made that call.
How were the Hendricks years?
The Hendricks years were. It's one of those things I didn't realize how good I had it there. And if you look back and talking about, it took me a long time to sort of start winning races but a lot of that's because I didn't sit still very long. I wished I could. Richard Childress, I'd have stayed there my whole career. It was a right chemistry, and everywhere else I went, I guess grass was always greener. I'd spend 3 or 4 years and I'd move to a different team and I'd move to a different team. So when I moved over to Hendricks, I'm thinking at that time, man, this is a great operation. They got multiple car teams. They got a great motor room, and they did. They had all that, but. I guess I was looking for something that didn't exist, and I even started my own team. But to me at that time, the multi-car team step concept at Hendricks wasn't working very good at all. And I think I remember hearing a conversation. I went to Amelia Island. There's a car show down there. I went down there this past year, and I bought a ticket, sat in the crowd. They were honoring Rick Hendricks that particular weekend at Amelia Island Concourse, which is a big car show. And a friend of mine came to town, visited, so we went and he talked to me, and let's go out and sit in the crowd. They seated about 500 people in an auditorium, and they had Terry Labonte, Jeff Gordon, Dale Jr., Schrader. I'm leaving somebody else out, I'm sure. But anyway, and Rick was on the stage, and they were talking about their days at Hendricks. And Jeff and Jeff Gordon and Terry Labonte were talking about, how we got along. Jeff and Terry got along really good. He said, but man, there's not a lot of information sharing. They were working harder at that time to not share the information, and it wasn't no fault of the drivers, but it got to be uncomfortable, and that's one reason I left there. But as far as a class act operation, Hendricks, they run a really good operation, and Rick. Matter of fact, we just sort of reacquainted here in the last 6 months, and just how stupid was I looking back? You look back and it's easy as you move through, and you look back and hindsight. If I'd have just weathered it one more year, there was some management structure changes and stuff that took place, and then the team started working together as a group instead of working hard. It kind of reminds you of a parent, and you got 5 kids, and they're all trying to get the parents, time and favoritism, and that wasn't under control when I was there. It wasn't like a Rick. Rick was really busy building his car dealership operations. He was there for every race, just about, but he couldn't make it during the week.
Right.
But anyway, Rick is he's a for real person. I'll tell you, he's a really good person. In hindsight, now looking back, I enjoyed my years as a car owner. But I learned a lot, and the more I learned as an owner, I gained more respect for all the people that I used to drive for, trying to do it on my own.
Now, What year did you start your own team?
94.
94. So you drove your own team in 94.
Mm-hmm.
So you were there 90. You were still with Hendrick in 93.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to be Jeff Gordon's teammate? Because he was getting a lot of attention, and for an old school guy like you, did you look at that and?
No, I mean, I knew that Rick was looking down the road. You know, I'm probably in my mid-30s and still pretty young, I'm guessing, at that time. I think it was mid-30s. You know, Rick had some teams that were really performing and some teams that weren't performing as well. And but bringing Jeff on, and the trick was bringing Ray Abraham in too with him. I thought from a business decision, no, I thought it was smart. The only problem that I sort of had there is that they were developing their CNC engine machining program at the time where everything is done with robotics. And I remember we broke that 93 season, we broke a lot. I think I was leading. I won Michigan, but the first Michigan, I won Michigan because Mark Martin broke. I think he was a dominant car, and I ended up winning it. The previous Michigan race, we dominated it, and we broke a motor. But we were doing a lot. We were running a lot of the experimental stuff at Hendricks that last year. At least as and I hope this is not bad information, but my understanding was we were getting a lot of the CNC new machines cylinder heads, and we broke a lot of cylinder heads that year. We ran well, but we broke a lot. And and Jeff comes along and he's running a different engine program. He doesn't break any engines that year. That was kind of why would we be at that time until Jeff came along, we were the best performing Hendricks team. And in my mind, why would we be the best, and why would we be the experiment? And I think it gets back to management and some other things. And I maybe had this story. As you get older, you remember things the way you think they were. Sometimes it's not always the case. In my memory, that's how things were, and that's one reason that the frustration started setting in. But not because Jeff was showing up. I mean, Jeff was he's going to be needed. We had a lot of old drivers in that organization, me included. So Jeff was a young talent that came along. I mean, Jeff and I got along really good, and we still get along good today. But no, a matter of fact, I've reminded Jeff about it. If he remembers the trip, we went out to Phoenix. The year he showed up, we go to Phoenix for a winter test. We spent a week out there. So we go out there, and Rick's on the plane, and we're headed all out to Phoenix. All the teams were testing out there. And at night, Rick came up to me and said, "Rick, do you mind taking Jeff to the gym tonight? I know you're going to go work out and stuff." He said, "Do you mind showing Jeff? He doesn't know anything about this working out stuff. Do you mind working with him?" I reminded Jeff about it the other day when I saw him. He didn't even remember that. So, but he did tell me he had a few concussions along the way too. So
Yeah.
so we're both. I don't know who remembers stuff the best, really.
Did you think that team ownership on your behalf was the way to go?
I did at the time, and not just for me. I was looking at, Alan Kowicki had a lot of success. Now, Alan is, he had to manage he was a completely different operation. But Alan was a chassis guy, brilliant chassis man. A lot of people don't realize how good he was on chassis. He was a college-educated engineer, mechanical engineer. He also ran the business side of his team, and he ran a very lean team. But I knew that I couldn't bring the engineering expertise. I'm going to have to depend on engineering, and we hired some good engineers when we started our team. But Alan had success with a single-car operation. And at that time, I just left a multi-car operation that wasn't cohesive. They didn't really work as a big unit. Of course, later on they did, and they become a powerhouse. So they figured that out. If I'd probably stayed put another year or so, it would have fixed itself. The problem would have. But so when I started my team, it was more about getting ready for the day that I don't drive. And I had planned on building the team instead of building hindsight, I probably should have built like an Infinity Series type team, and then brought it up and then transferred over to that. But I went ahead and took the gamble and built the team from scratch. We didn't buy any equipment. We bought and built everything from scratch, which I was proud of. And no disrespect to Tony, he's done a great job. I'm sad to see him leave the sport, but he stepped into an operation that had already been around about 8 years when he came in. We built it, had nothing, didn't even have a toolbox, and 6 months later, we're up and running at Daytona. And I was really proud of the fact that we built it. What I didn't figure on, as we had success, I never figured we're going to have to build this team many times over because people go after your talent. They would look at, and if you won a race, you ran well, they'd say, "Wait a minute, why? how's he doing that? Well, they know it's driver only carries it so much. It's your engineers, it's your crew chiefs, it's your people. So they started picking people, and I felt like I knew the people that I'd hired because I spent my time in the garage area. I hung out more with mechanics than I did with drivers. So I would hang out more with the mechanics, and so I knew who to recruit. And we had a good team, and it was really a building team from when I stepped out of the race car. We would have a team there to put some young driver in. It just didn't, handwriting. It wasn't meant to be. So
you won the Brickyard in '97.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that day.
Well, the Brickyard was really won probably by the previous winner. We hired a crew chief by the name of Jim Long. And Jim Long came on board, and we had Pro Motors at our time, Peter Gal, George Gable Pro Motor Company. We had a neat combination. And the reason Jim kind of came along, I always had my eye on Indy. And I saw with Lake Speed, he worked on the 9-car, Lake Speed at the time. And they ran off the wheel. They qualify up front. They'd run up front. And I knew Jim Long was the guy. And so anyway, that team's Mellon, I guess they went through changes, and I was able to get Jim Long as a crew chief on board. And that's really the cars handled good. They were fast, Pro Motor under the hood. Also, they were pretty sharp on fuel economy. And we won the race that day. And a lot of people say, well, you won it on fuel economy. But if you look back and you rerun that race, that was back in the day when track position was very important. I mean, people just learned that, at Indy, really that weekend. That's where it really showed up. But we had a fast car. We qualified, I think, in the top 10, top 7. And our car was quick, but we never could get track position. So the caution comes out late in the race. We decide, our guys in the pit said, we got plenty of fuel. We'll stay on the track. We'll get track position. It wasn't about fuel. It was about, do you want to give up track position for tires? So we said, hey, track position is going to be more important than tires. And sure enough, they were right. So we had to run about 12, 15 laps on the green at the end. And all those guys that were really fast up front, they got buried for the first time. They couldn't get out of their own way. And Bobby Labonte and I kind of checked out because we had clean air and won the race. A big deal, big race. Still means a lot today.
The next year, Martinsville.
Mm-hmm.
When did you know that you were in trouble?
On pit road, before we pull off of pit road, I knew I was in trouble because
Really?
We had some things in our car that was a little unique. We had a seat that was designed, and it's not all that difficult to make, but it was a double line seat. In the center section, basically, it was a cavity. We could pump fresh air in there. And we just had a pretty simple ice chest with a dry ice block in it. And it looked like a still in there, a bunch of copper pipe and tubing and stuff. So the air would have to run through that chest, and it would run through the duck hose into that seat. It worked so good that we put all the insulation, all that in the car underneath the seat area. All that insulation was extra weight and stuff. We pulled all that stuff out. So most people, say, well, you're not going to get burnt so bad. You got the insulation. We pulled all that stuff out. The seat worked so good. Leaving pit road, hit the button to switch, and the thing's not working. And there's a circuit breaker I can reach, and it's not working. And basically, found out it was better to take the hose off the seat instead of using the hose. And that same thing also fed the cold air to your helmet. So it was just a lot of scenarios, a lot of things added up to compound the problem that we had.
How far was it into the race when it really started to impact you?
I was doing everything I thought I could do to get to the halfway point. And then we come in. I remember coming down pit road, and one thing you want to do, you're going to be careful when you put ice water. You dump a bunch of ice water in the seat, and I assumed that the seat had holes drilled in it. You can always drill holes in the seat. Well, because the way the seat was designed, when they put the water in the seat, it didn't get to any of the drain holes. So basically, the water was starting to almost. It didn't boil in the seat, obviously, but it was not far from it. So now I'm sitting in. So it compounded its problem. And then they hand me they give you like a garden hose. They use it on the radiator for quick connect in case it overheats. They can do a quick connect. They took the quick connect, put on a regular garden hose thing,
Sprayer.
Handed that thing to me, and that hose had been laying out in the sun. So they took that thing, and I put my goggles up on my face and just squirted it like a garden hose on me. And the water had to be, if it wasn't boiling, it wasn't far from it. So when I did that, man, I did everything but pass out right there when that the hot water hit me in the face.
So it didn't help any. It just made it worse.
Oh no, it was hot water. I mean, it's like it would burn your skin almost because of gardeners. You go wash your car and the hoses and how hot it gets. I had a big dose of that right in my face, and so it was like, how much abuse can we give this guy this day? And it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just a series of things. And it got to the end, and I remember laying in the corner of the seat, just laying in the seat corner. And I finally told him, said, listen, I can hear you guys, but I'm not talking unless something comes up. You need to know, I'll let you know. But so the last 100 laps, I don't even think I talked. I just remember being that hot.
I don't want to get too dramatic, but it sounds like it could have very easily been a life threatening thing.
I don't think so. The reason I say that, because I've been hotter once before.
Really?
At Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And they used to have the moat, or the ditch around it, and evaporate some. I remember being so hot there. Being hot's not, it's terrible. It's uncomfortable, and you know that it's a relief coming at the end of the race, and it's kind of a mental psych deal you would do. But that day in Nashville, it got so hot, and I still had like 30 laps to go. I started getting chilled. I knew the signs of a heat stroke were coming on because now, I don't know about dying, but having actually a heat stroke. That of all the times in a car, I can only remember that happened one time where I actually had chill bumps on my skin, and I was, wait a minute, this isn't right. This is right, and I just remember knowing the signs of a heat stroke. So the Martinsville race, as hot as it was, I never got those chills. I was just hot, so I wasn't concerned about that. I was concerned about just really going to sleep probably more than anything.
How much of Victory Lane do you remember?
I remember it pretty well. I remember thinking to myself that if we can get to the checker flag, and I told her guy, I said, listen, I'm not going to stop at Victory Lane. The infield, I said, you make a path to the infield care center, because I'm gonna need to get hydrated pretty quick. I'm gonna need an IV bag or something. I'm driving right up to the hospital, and that's where I'm gonna get out at. So y'all be there. That's where I'm getting out at. So I made it that far, and I remember most. I remember I remember needing relief, getting oxygen and all that. But I don't even remember getting out of the car. I remember I saw pictures later of Kirby Boone. He's been around for quite a few years, still around today. Helped pull me out of the car, got me on the ground, and I remember, I think it was Jerry Punch came up to me with a microphone. Of course, we're robots, man. I just say this, it just comes out. You put a mic in front of a driver, you always got something to say. But I remember between hits on the oxygen mask and talking to Jerry, I still remember that. I don't remember a lot of other interviews, but I remember that one.
How seriously were you injured?
Well, I was burnt bottom of my thighs. Anywhere I touched the seat was pretty much blistered, and in some areas, right, my butt only I couldn't sit down real good for a while because on each butt cheek I had it was more than a first degree. I would call it second degree burn. It hung around a little while, but I tried to get Linda to help me rub that ointment on there, but I couldn't get any cooperation out of her. She said, "You're on your own on that one, buddy." But no, it hung around a while, and then burning your feet was always a big issue, and that was an issue. I assume it is probably today. And we really, I look back now, I look back at some old driving shoes, and we got no asbestos matting, which is bad stuff, taped all to our shoes and stuff, all wrapped around to insulate your shoe, keep your foot from getting burnt. And then, of course, my first recollection, I'm rambling on. I remember our first race I went to was Michigan. This is off the subject, but this is kind of a quick story. Bill Champion, I'm going to go up there and help him pit crew his car. My brother had a little airplane. We flew up there. Champ picks us up. He had a big rig at that time, was a tractor, but it had a open ramp on the back of it. And that's how you hauled your car. Well, Champ had been at a hotel that night. He comes by the airport on Sunday morning, the grass strip we flew into, and picks me and my brother up and my friend up. And the only place we could get into was the engine bay where they stored the spare motors. So they would put you up in there where the spare motors were and close the door. Well, man, it was a 15-minute drive to the racetrack. It was uncomfortable. We get in, and we knew we were probably pulling up because the motor turns off a minute. and the door opens up. Somebody opens the door up where like a couple of illegals opens the door, and I remember looking down for the door opened up, and there's a pair of pointed toe cowboy boots looking at me, and the door opens up, and I look up, and there's a man standing there with a hat, sunglasses on, Richard Petty. He said, "You boys had a little bit of a rough ride, didn't you?" And that was my welcome to NASCAR.
When did you decide it was time to get out?
Well, you could see the technology was changing very aggressively, and I knew it was time when I drove for Robert Yates, and the first time I came out, we shut our team down, and we went over to Robert had hired me to drive the 28 car, and at that time, Robert told me, said, "Ricky, we're gonna if you'll come over and drive this car, we need to build it back up again." I guess the 88 was kind of became the primary car because Davey got killed and then Ernie got hurt and I guess he made quite a few driver changes along the way, and he said we need to strengthen up the team. He said if you'll come over and drive, he said I want you to bring 10 of your best people. We need more people, and I want 2 of your race cars. And I said, well, yeah, Robert, I'd like to. And he said, no, bring the crew chief, if you like Fatback McSwain. And I said, well, we've been working together. We do pretty good together. We know each other. It takes too long to build that relationship, so I'd like to bring him. So anyway, I go to work for Robert, and it works pretty good. We run pretty well in a 28 car for a couple of years. And then after that, when that kind of came to an end, I'm not sure how that all came to an end, but when it ended, I was starting to think, I'm tired of building and rebuilding and building and rebuilding. If I just stay put at one operation, I'd have been okay. But the constant rebuild was taking its toll on me as much as anything. But when I went to drive for Robert, the last go round, the Snickers, I know it wasn't a good experience for Robert. It wasn't a good way for me to go out either. But it became very frustrating. But we had one engineer on the team to work on the car, and he was a kid out of UNCC part-time, I think it was, or he just got out. He was a good kid, trying to do all he could. But now these teams had engineering departments, and Robert Yates' engine program was second to none, and it is today. Nobody's any better, and that was a strength. But I think that the car side got so far behind on aero wind tunnel work. I mean, we ran not very good that whole last year, and I knew then that, hey, I'm not going to end a career. If I could erase it, and I'm sure if Robert could erase that year, neither one of us would have probably been out there. He didn't want it any more than I did. We didn't want to run like that. We just weren't competitive. And but we just didn't have the support. The reason I went to Robert that last year, he actually had Delora, the car company that designed the car that they're running today, Italian company. Because I knew the value of engineering. Robert knew the value. I don't know exactly how it happened, but a month or two before we were ready to go start the season, the engineering deal kept getting pushed back, and Delora never got signed. So the only really reason I was going over there was 2 reasons. Robert Yates' engine program, Delora being our chassis program. I just knew how far his chassis program was off, and it just didn't keep up with the times, opposite of the motor company. But with Delora, the whole thing, history would have been a whole lot different. But without that, without engineering support, without any modeling technology, we were doomed. We went to the racetrack, but that was about it.
I do want to ask, how difficult was it to close the doors on your own team?
Well, there's 2 parts to that, really. Anytime you put in hours, Linda included, she put in crazy hours getting that thing off the ground. And a real quick story on that. When I'm interviewing crew chiefs, this is in September, and we're going to race Daytona coming up in February. I was still driving for Rick. We rented a 20,000 square foot warehouse over there right where the Penske shop was for many years on the same industrial complex. And I had a crew chief, I'm sure I can say his name now, but he was a top crew chief, was going to come by and interview for the job. Well, he said, I need to come by there at night because I don't want anybody, knowing that I'm over here. And so anyway, I said, well, you don't have to worry about anything. There's nobody working here but me and Linda, and I got a secretary that started. And so it'd just be me and you. And he shows up at the shop, and he walks in. And that day, our first delivery showed up. It was 4 jack stands and a jack. And 20,000 square foot warehouse, 4 jack stands and a jack. It looks pretty empty, right?
Yeah.
And this guy walks around. He's looking around. It's just a big metal building inside. He's looking around. And he says, let me get this straight now, Rick. He said, you're talking about running the Daytona 500 this February, not February, not around a year and a half.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that's the plan. He looked at it. He says, shook his head, said, I don't think I can help you. I don't think I can build anything nowhere there. So he said, good luck. Walked out the door. It was Steve Meal. And he was at Roush, and I guess they had a tiff about something.
Yeah.
So that was who we. Anyway, he didn't take the job, and I don't blame him. Pretty ambitious, but Bill Engel did step in, our crew chief, and he was able to do amazing things to get that team on the racetrack for that first year. Did a real good job. But how easy was it to shut it down? When you build something from scratch like that, I guess my point was to show you how empty it was and how it became. We won 6 races, as an owner, but it was black and white. We had Tide as a sponsor, and when we started, our sponsorship was second to none. It was good money, and we ran good. We ran competitively, more so in the early goings. As time went on, it was taking more and more money, and that's when Yates takes. Not Yates didn't, but Jack Roush takes in a partner. I guess Roush Fenway,
Right.
John Henry comes on board. Richard Childress had a partner. All these teams are starting. They can't make it on sponsorship dollars, and sponsorship saying, "Hey, we can only pay what we can justify our program." So Tide didn't have any more money. They had tons of money, but the program didn't. The return on the dollar wasn't there. So I understood that. So the handwriting was on the wall is that if we can't raise money, I'm not going to ride around just to be a start and part guy. So that was the reason. So once we decided, hey, we ran every dime we had in our budget. We spent every dime. And when the last race of the year was over, it was done. But we paid everybody, didn't owe anybody any money. We left out of there, and we shut it down, shut the budget down. And it came to an end, and then watch it get auctioned off in an auction. I couldn't go. I didn't sit there and watch it because I remember being a part of almost every piece that was bought in that shop. But the guys around me that didn't sell and tried to keep going because everybody was hanging on for those franchises that would give you some real value instead of everything is basically worth 10 cents on the dollar. So we were trying to think about, do we borrow money and try to shore up the team? I'll use borrowed money along with sponsorship money, and we'll have a good budget again. And we thought about it. Now, Jeff Bodine, he went down that road, and I think his brother Brett. And I don't think I'm making anything out of turn here, saying they bankrupted all those guys. They went belly up. And, a driver's not, you do make a little money. I mean, you make good money if you're smart, but you can't waste any money. And a race team, it would eat a driver's savings up in 2 or 3 months. You could spend your driver's whole life savings if you're not careful. So we smartly walked away. Just separated. The emotion said stay put, but the financial was black and white. We had to walk away.
So you did go to drive for Robert.
Mm-hmm.
The weekend before 9/11, you won at Richmond in a pretty heated battle with Kevin Harvick.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever year it was, I think you were driving the 21 car maybe, and you and Kevin got into it again at Richmond, and some of his crew guys, and he actually jumped up on top.
He jumped up after the crew guys kind of cleaned things out. He was a little late to the game. Yeah.
I really, really, really wanted you to be able to get to Kevin and see what might happen.
Well, I don't know. We're both pretty headstrong. It'd probably been. I don't think it'd have been a one-punch fight. I don't think. I mean, it might have gone on a while. I had Pat Trice, probably smart thing. He's standing at my car window, wouldn't let me get out. But you got to remember at the time, Wood Brothers loved him to death. The guys that are standing on my roof of my car, they're all about 18 to 25 years old and bodybuilders. I mean, these were some big guys, and the Wood Brothers. I mean, they're the last ones you'd ever. The emotion of a fight getting ready to happen. I mean, there's definitely a lot of motion in the air, and it could have gotten pretty nasty. I look back at it now, and I look back at it. If you forget what happened the year before, But if you look at it, basically I got in the back of Kevin. I mean, he didn't back into me. I got into the back of him, turned him around. And if I'd have been him, I'd have been hot too. I mean, I'd have been hot. But I would also say, wait a minute, what's the difference from a year ago? I did the same thing to Ricky. I should have wrecked, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But if him actually getting that upset, I understand it now. And it's funny how you look at people now, and I haven't spoke to Kevin Harvick. I don't think we ever talked. But Rusty Wallace, him and I think of a couple of races I'm laughing at him. He's got a fender problem or something, and I'm laughing. I'm going to win the race. And he takes me out at least 2 races I can think of. And him and I really were at each other's throats more than me and Earnhardt we'd see each other once or twice a year. But Rusty and I, and where I'm headed with this, and hope you don't cut it up and make it look wrong, but him and I just didn't speak. We just didn't. And after retirement, the way things work, and I always had a respect for his driving ability. Don't get me wrong, but a cheap shot cost me some wins, and I'm sure he's thinking I ran him off the racetrack at Sears Point, maybe cost him a win. But as time goes by, we run into each other at I think Amelia Island, or we end up having dinner together, some kind of race. Him and Patty and my wife Lynn and I, and he's like I would say best friends, but he's like the neatest guy, knowing him away from racing. Yeah. And it's like he's in the Hall of Fame. He's gone to bat for me like you wouldn't believe. I mean, here's a guy, we were arch enemies. Now he's telling the press, he said, I can tell you one darn thing, Harry Gant, Ricky Rudd need to be in that Hall of Fame. And I wouldn't have believed it, and someone sent me the video of it. So here's these guys, it's weird how, what do they say, time heals all,
Yeah.
And now he's like, we're like good friends, and enjoy each other's company. He was playing golf with my sister up in the mountains where he had a place, and just, anyway, it's kind of a neat how things work full circle.
I was really hoping that you would bring that about Rusty back around, because in the shot there's a Rusty Wallace helmet.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to appear like I was taking sides or anything.
Yeah. If it had been a Kevin Harvick Hans the brace, I think I threw that. He left it on my car, and I think I returned it to him, but I slung it halfway down pit road. So I thought you had one of those Kevin Harvick Hans devices.
Yeah. So, once you did walk away for good, what did you do? You didn't come back to the racetrack for a long time.
Let me say one more thing before we get into that. We talked about rivalries and stuff. If I had a race car in the later years, probably the first 2 guys I would have called would have been Rusty Wallace and Kevin Harvick to drive it. Even though you're at each other's throats, for the guy behind the wheel, and my fans would probably say, "What are you saying?" I'm saying the guy behind the wheel. Somebody wants to get out and they want to fight that bad. They're driving with all the heart they've got. And I can't say the same for everybody out there. There's a handful of guys that I put in that category. And Rusty and Kevin would have been 2 of those guys that were enemies. But here, if I had a car, I'd be knocking on the door. Okay, come drive my car for me. I'm sorry, so I cut you off on the other thing you're saying.
Now, after you did walk away, what did you do?
Absolutely nothing.
You got into didn't you get into triathlons and stuff?
No, mountain biking. I thought I wanted to be a mountain bike racer.
Yeah.
Until I realized how good these guys were. Even your local level guys.
Yeah.
They train like crazy, man. They're serious about it. I say that. I started off riding just to stay in shape, have something to do, and it reminded me of my motocross days, except you're having a pedal. Yeah. So I did that probably quite a few years, 7, 8. I'm still doing it now, but not like I was. I kind of hate to say it too loud, but I ride an e-bike in the trails now a lot. I probably ride that more than I do my pedal bike. But anyway, I kind of got serious with that. And basically I was refocusing everything I had done for racing into mountain biking. I said, you know what? I had to, like my wife said, I had to live it first. So it's taken me about 8 to 10 years to finally get that competitive level out of your system. I mean, you don't flip the switch. It's still there, but you kind of learn how to harness it. I ran had a go-kart that I would run up at GoPro Professional Go-Kart Series, and I ran that a little bit. Well, we actually won a big race in Indianapolis with that go-kart back in. That was right about the time I was retired in 2006, I think it was, and we were running against all the IndyCar drivers up there, and we actually Scott Dixon, Dan Weldon.
Wow.
We got a little video somebody sent me. It's Joseph Newgarden finished second in the race that we won that day. the go-kart race.
Yeah.
And it's good. It's actually a TV show. They had put together a show of that particular race, but he was 15, 16 years old, and somebody said, yo, let's look at this old video. And Newgarden, I didn't even know who ran second. Newgarden ran second. But anyway, I got to working on go-karts as hard as, you're spending all your time working on stuff. And so anyway, I said, I'm not doing that anymore. Why should I? I wasn't, I don't know why I was doing it. I guess because it related to the speed. So really what I do nowadays is I fly my little I got a little airplane I fly around, and I like to train, and I've been doing a lot of extra training and stuff, and I enjoy mountain flying, so I go find the mountains and go practice in and out of there, and that'll give you, and whenever you want an adrenaline rush, you going out of these little mountain airports, that kind of gets your adrenaline going for you.
What's mountain flying?
In the mountains,
like in a stunt plane?
almost like a bush type plane. My airplane is just a normal, everyday little Cessna. But when you take it into a short strip, and you're in the mountainous area where you got to drop a lot of altitude in a real big hurry to be able to get down to where the field is, that's sitting almost like in a bowl. So you got to learn how to. It's completely different flying than regular flying. And then I went and got instrument current again. I had my instrument rating many years ago, so I got a good friend, and I think I took 135 hours of training last year on instrument training, recurrency. Just a challenge. You got to have something to do besides maintenance work, which I do a lot of.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, probably one thing I do miss is the loyalty that the fans have to these drivers. You don't realize it till after you retire, and then you see that, hey, these people are for real. And some of them we don't have a whole lot of what I call really close friends, but most of them are people that I met on the road that were fans at one time. Yeah. And but anyway, this just the support. People don't realize how loyal these fans are, and how much of an important place you play in their life. I guess we're entertainers, I guess, but they really stand behind their driver, whoever that driver might be. They stand behind them, and that's something you sort of didn't really appreciate till after you step out of the driver's seat.